Welcome to the first webinar of the series for the last mile organized by the Logistics Point. I'm Stuart, the editor of the Logistics Point. I'm already joined by Marcus Hurd, who is from Stuart, UK, and he's going to tell us about what Stuart does and also talk about hub to home operations. Before I give the word to Marcus, I want to announce that we will have three more webinars with different topics, with very interesting speakers from multiple last mile specialists every Tuesday of October. So for those of you who haven't yet booked their calendar, I will send you information as well as in the chat today and to your emails if you're part of our mailing list. Marcus, thank you very much for joining me and the people on the stream, and the stage is yours.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me. Um, right, guys, I will try without further ado to enter straight into this. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Right, so just to introduce Stuart, our mission is to provide logistics services for a sustainable world. And I think it's Nick and I were having a conversation. I think logistics, particularly in urban centres, is quite a turning point, especially post-pandemic. But this morning, I'm just going to share with you in 10 to 15 minutes a little bit of Stuart's background, what we specialise in, how we are aiming to disrupt in hyper-urban logistics and final mile, and also involving fulfilment in that. So to talk to you a little bit about Stuart's journey in numbers, we were born in August 2015. And that was a launch in the UK, over France and Spain, and that was predominantly an on-demand business, which I'll talk about shortly. In March 2017, we were lucky enough to be acquired by the DPD Group, and in February 2019, we launched our local distribution hubs in Stuart XL in France, which has been a huge success in the French market. From October 2020, we launched to start Stuart in Poland. And we now operate in over 110 cities through France, UK, Spain, and Poland, and we have more than 500 headquarter employees. The opportunity and the objective for my area of a business, Hub to Home, is to operate 100% green, and that's without any offset. So I want to be absolutely as far away from fossil fuels as I possibly can be. And I think that's becoming a very important USP for logistics operators in urban centres. Stuart has over 200 key partners that trust Stuart, and those include premium brands. We're working very closely with the likes of Apple, Nespresso, Zara, Uniqlo, Ocado, Co-op, Decathlon, to name just a few. So we have some credentials in the market. We're currently performing over 5 million deliveries per month. In fact, last month it was 7.2 million. We have a presence in 4 European markets today, but that's always expanding, and we're always looking for future opportunities. We see Western Europe as our opportunity to play. So how does Stuart work? Well, we have a mixture of store fulfillment services, on-demand fulfillment services, and urban hubs. Our MO is that we will deliver within a precise 1 hour window, as greenly as possible. And we can provide from our hub business same or next day services. The operation for our on-demand business works with geo-localized couriers. So we use our proprietary tech and our app platform to link businesses with couriers to perform services. In the hub to home business, I operate a fleet of Stuart couriers who again operate in 100% green carbon neutral vehicles. So we're geo-localized. We have an environmental commitment to be different, and that's staying away from offsetting. We work very deeply with our supply and demand algorithms to make sure that our service is second to none. And we work with automatic dispatch, API and EDI integrations to make working with us as easy as possibly can be. We have 2 core retail last mile offerings, and I think these are interesting when we talk about fulfillment and the logistics point question today. One is ship from store. That relies on the retailers or our vertical store network. The customer promise is a 2-hour delivery, instant or scheduled, and we operate 364 days a year. Our coverage today is 35 plus cities, and across the UK, that's London, Manchester, Birmingham, all the big guys. I think this proposition is particularly interesting when we think of the current marketplace, particularly the impact of pandemic, as it's giving people in the retail and high street areas the opportunity to repurpose elements of their stores that aren't perhaps as busy as they once were, creating micro fulfillment and actually turning the live store inventory into an online fulfillment center. This is quickly becoming a strategy of key retailers across certainly London and the major cities of the UK. Secondarily to that, we have a new hub to home proposition. This is a new launch for Stuart in the UK. That operates the same day, evening, or next day services across 3 daily time slots, morning, afternoon, and evening. The unique selling point for the hub to home proposition is our unique ability in Stuart to accept a very late injection of parcels into our hub for sortation and onward distribution. Sometimes as late as actually collecting on the day of delivery for a next day proposition, for example. The beauty of that is being able to smooth demand, particularly for pick, pack and wrap services across the retailers, DCs and third parties, potentially allowing retailers to cut off selling to customers later, achieving more gross merchandise value per transaction by having a longer cut-off time, and equally smoothing the spikes of activity in their distribution centres by offering a late injection and a more agile and nimble distribution through to final mile. We rely on a concept of single hub supply in urban centres. So what we aren't trying to do is create a super network of multiple hubs and multiple points to handle and sort parcels. We want to touch the parcels as few times as possible, always deliver them on 100% green vehicles, and always deliver them to the customer within a precise 60-minute window. So when we talk about hub to home, it enables that same day evening and next day deliveries in London right now, and will be across the UK next year. Items are injected into Stuart's urban hub for distribution throughout London, and it's 100% electric, as I've mentioned. The time slots I've mentioned are morning, afternoon and evening. A bit of an idea of an operational flow. This is interesting to sad people like me, but in terms of how the data flows from a customer's order, essentially on the retailer's platform, order would be placed as normal. Order preparation otherwise would happen in the retailer's DC or store location, labeling, whether that be provided by direct API, CSV file injected to my stack by the retailer or third party, or via a more traditional CMS integration like Metapack or Sorted, will produce a label in the retailer's DC or packing area. That information is flown into my system to allow for routing and scheduling. Parcels are collected from the DC, the retailer's DC or the selected stores. Now that could happen, as I've said, any time on D-1 or up to times to be agreed on D-0. So we really aim for that late injection, as I really think that final mile logistics in 2021 and beyond is all about removing carbon wherever possible and being as agile as possible in terms of smoothing spikes in the supply chain driven by premium propositions. We acknowledge all of our customers with a 1 hour precise delivery slot by SMS and give the opportunity for rescheduling. It's a very similar flow for the same day. Naturally, those timelines are compressed slightly. When I talk about our value proposition, I think it becomes quite interesting and links very well to the conversations that Nick and I have had. If I look across the top, I think key requirements to perform fulfillment and final mile delivery services in urban centres today, you need to deliver fast and precise operations. You have to have some sort of angle to sustainability. Personally, I don't feel that should include any offset or otherwise, and it should be truly about taking carbon out of the vehicle journeys. We should be able to provide live tracking. We need to be able to give in-flight direction options. We need to be able to follow a parcel on a map. That's what consumers will desire. It has to be 7 days a week. Gone are the days of Monday to Friday deliveries and time windows of 8 till 6 p.m. We have to be really precise and we have to be really flexible. And when you start to think about the vertical fulfillment services and line line haul and final mile needs to integrate with, it has to be easy. A regular conversation I have with retail clients is what their strategy might be around their own web services pack and order management packs, how they're working with new carrier management services. It's incredibly important, I believe, for fulfillment and final mile carriers to be very mindful of the integrations that they hold with carrier management services and ensure they're the right ones. It's critically important to a retailer to be able to select services quickly and with minimum distraction and tech development. Having right integrations to CMS out of the box for Stuart gives us a unique position to be highly flexible. We're 97% on time at the moment. I will never be satisfied with 97%, and my target's 99.5. 100% of our last mile has been performed green. We've never put a diesel vehicle on the road, and we operate 363 days a year. Today, we operate from a large urban hub in West London across both 1 to 3 zones of inner London and out to the M25. I have plans to accelerate national coverage in 2022 to the top 15 cities in the UK by capita, and I can share that information on request. 100% green means exactly what it is. The reason it's so important in urban centres is every retailer that I've spoken to has an ambition to reduce their carbon footprint. Whilst we appreciate in Stuart that for global retailers, quite a small percentage of the retailer's carbon actually exists in the final mile, it's the piece that we can influence in Stuart. So we're passionate about ensuring that it's genuinely sustainable. And Stuart saves on average 5 kilograms of CO2 per vehicle per slot, which isn't insignificant over a period of time, and certainly isn't significant when we think of moving to a significantly scaled parcel operation in 2022. This translates into an average saving of 0.2 kilos of CO2 per package. Again, this is an attractive value to retailers and verticals that we work with trying to deliver green propositions. Live tracking standard. We want to give maximum visibility to customers, and the live tracking link sent to every customer for every hub order at the point that we receive data in our system. There is always a contact the driver button to maximise delivery success at drop-off, and again, that reduces stem mileage and helps with our green credentials. The delivery ETA is in minutes to maximise convenience for the customer, and they can plan to reschedule for another time, again, avoiding wasted time at the doorstep. This is all about driving efficiency. We have a couple of case studies that I won't dwell on too long. Ritual's case study. Stuart's enabled Rituals, who are a beauty and cosmetic retailer in London, to enable same-day delivery for their orders across the UK and France. The mission was to enable Rituals to offer same-day delivery for the consumers and leverage their stores as micro-fulfillment centres. And I think that that's worked really well in allowing them to pack orders through the day. We collect at a set point in time and inject for same-day evening delivery. Customer fulfillment feedback has been excellent, and we've delivered 98% on time. Nespresso has been a very complicated case for the hub. Particularly popular in Paris right now. We're delivering more than 2,000 daily parcels to Nespresso directly from their Nespresso stores into Stuart's urban hub in central Paris and delivered across 2-hour time slots from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Again, it's 100% green, and in France they're using either 100% electric mopeds or natural gas vans emitting no monoxides. In-flight options are activated for end customers for Nespresso, including delivery slot modification, delivery date, and other modifications agreed with Nespresso. And I think this is again showing how a delivery agent can be a true partner of a retail store, and use our services and our proprietary tech to enable Nespresso to give a better customer experience in the doorstep. Thank you very, very much for your time. I'm going to jump back to the screen so I can see Nick quickly. I think the key thought that I'll leave people with regarding inner urban logistics and final mile right now in 2021 and fulfillment is, I feel our duty is all about providing efficiency to the businesses that we support as a service provider. And that means in lots of ways partnering with those businesses, understanding their pain points, points and doing whatever we can to smooth the bumps in the road to create a more efficient, more effective, more single touch version of final mile logistics. I'm really proud to be part of Stuart, and I think we're taking big steps to do that, and we're doing that in a carbon neutral way. I'm happy to answer any questions, providing they're not too difficult. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much as well. A few questions, and one of the things that I often, while working on the webinars, hear from people in the last mile is, do you think that there are too many companies competing for customer attention at the moment on the last mile?
Too many companies competing in the last mile. I think it's an interesting point. As a company competing in the last mile, I'll never say that there are too many, or I won't do it on a call right now, or I might not be able to pay my mortgage. I think what's interesting is what the future of collaboration looks like. I think that logistics is moving at such a fast pace and a step with technology, and our retailers and our other marketing verticals that are evolving so quickly. But actually what's really important in the modern logistics market is really deep subject matter expertise, and that requires collaboration. If I'm an expert in eco final mile, I'm probably not an expert in cross-border air freight. And therefore I should probably partner with somebody if I need to provide those services. I think historically, and certainly when I joined the logistics market 22 years ago, Nick, I think it was all about taking over and trying to take as many streams of logistics as you can and owning them. Actually, increasingly, I'm talking to people that previously we might have considered competitors, and having open conversations about how we collaborate, not only to get the right result for our own balance sheets and our own environmental impact, but to be able to solve the really complex problems for our retail partners, because one business can't do that. It requires real deep subject matter expertise.
And a few questions from the people watching, so I'll bring one of them. The first one is access to the curb an issue in certain locations.
It is. It's something that we're trying to deal with creatively. Certainly those of you in London will know that the alfresco dining brought in by the pandemic in certain parts of central London has meant getting to the curb or getting into certain roads has been slightly challenging. It's not beyond the wit of man. We do operate multiple vehicle types, so we're finding solutions to those problems wherever we can. Essentially, it requires a different approach, and I think particularly in the urban centres that we're dealing in right now, pedestrianisation is something that's going to continue and is likely to increase. So I haven't got a perfect answer for it right now, Neil. It is an issue. We are managing it. I'm really interested to hear from anybody that's having a similar thing and can potentially forecast where it's going in London. At the moment, I'm taking quite an organic approach to solving it.
And the other one is specifically about reverse logistics. And do your customers ask you for reverse logistics or sorting things like the waste?
It's something that is actually very high on my agenda. I've worked previously with a number of retail businesses, and being involved in their supply chain development was a great opportunity to look at how supplier packaging, for example, can be turned into consumables for the retailer. I feel that Stuart can provide an extension to those services. Right now, I think I'd put it back to that point of collaboration and how we actually perform a better, more joined up service with some of the clients that we support. What do I mean by that? I perfectly have the opportunity for doing reverse logistics today and for providing recycling services or injecting waste or otherwise back to the retailers. I'm not sure that loop really exists at the moment. It tends to be closed and within the retailer's premises. But certainly we're doing everything we can to encourage that. We need to develop more reverse logistics services as well to ensure that we can potentially wait at the doorstep. Fashion's going to be a big market for Stuart, and there's something for me when you look at ladies fashion, and sorry, ex-retailer, but you look at ladies fashion with an average return rate of kind of 58% of items, click and collect and fast delivery, driving up the number of options that are delivered to the doorstep, inevitably resulting in, I think it was the last statistic was 4 out of 8 garments returned. So if that's the case, why are we going to make another visit? Shouldn't we book a longer delivery slot and allow the customer the chance to try on if they want to at their leisure and not have to make a repeat delivery booking. And also, quite importantly, not have to make another vehicle journey. Naturally, that won't fit 100% of instances, but I think it's an opportunity that we can explore with the right tech. And I think for certain luxury businesses that we would like to work with and are working with right now, it will be a very attractive proposition in the future.
There are a few more questions, but before I bring the last one at this moment, so we continue, there are a few people who wanted to connect with you, so I will send the people who are watching your presentation as well as more information from you if they want to connect with you. But the last question from this part of the webinar is, who have you partnered with for Ship from Home, and how much progress have you made with this concept?
When you say partnered, I'm assuming that you mean store providers rather than tech providers, Sam. I'm going to answer it as if you mean stores and retailers. So one of the biggest ones that I think you'll know is we're providing services from Apple in terms of ship from store. We're also providing it for a number of boutique businesses across the London area in the UK right now. And the concept for them has been a very simple one of actually, particularly with their inner London locations and in the city where footfall's been really low, let's make the inventory work for them. We found via the integrations that Stuart holds already with key CMSs, getting live with those retailers has been reasonably straightforward, but being really transparent, working on micro fulfillment and what that means in retail stores and what that means for a retail store profile is interesting. And stores have got work to do to help their colleagues and their personnel understand what packing online orders means and what dispatch windows look like, and a bit of urgency and a bit of timing and all of those things. But I think it's a real step forward in terms of making expensive real estate in London pay.
Well, thank you very much. You will try to stay for the panel discussion. You just mentioned micro fulfillment. Sandra Rothbard, who is part of principal at Freight Matters, is going to speak about micro fulfillment just in a second. Thank you very much, Marcus. I know there are quite a lot of other questions as well, so I hope you will be able to answer them in just around 10 minutes time. Now, just a very quick break of a minute, and then we are going to talk about micro fulfillment and in urban settings. Thank you very much, Marcus.
Thank you.
Welcome again. Now I'm joined by Sandra Rothbard from Freight Matters. She's going to talk about micro fulfillment, which Marcus just mentioned about it. And Sandra is a person who knows quite a lot about micro fulfillment. Sandra, thank you very much for joining me and the other people on the live stream.
Thank you so much for having me. Okay, let me get my screen up. Okay.
And
Are you able to see
thank you.
everything?
Yes, we are. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. So again, thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sandra Rothbard. I am an urban planner, and I consult with government, small and large businesses, researchers, and nonprofits on anything related to urban freight. So that could be curb management, policy, sustainability, and resilience, to stakeholder engagement and tech innovation. And I'm here to talk a little bit, as Nick mentioned, on the urban story and what are some of the issues around warehousing, micro-fulfillment, and other small facilities that can really help not only general e-commerce issues, but broader urban transportation. So no surprise, in 2020, we saw a reduction in retail sales due to the pandemic, but a astronomical increase in e-commerce. No surprise, not only were more folks at home that were used to shopping online, but there was a lot more adopters that maybe were a little nervous, maybe not tech savvy beforehand, but a lot of new consumers sort of discovered e-commerce last year. Now, no surprise, we have a lot of issues around emissions when it comes to last mile transportation, generally speaking. So a quarter of all global CO2 emissions actually comes from transportation, and a quarter of that is actually the last mile specifically. It's also the most costly when it comes to deliveries, that last mile. So these are some of the current situations and issues. In the EU, also no surprise that there's a safety concern when it comes to last mile delivery. When you have larger, heavier vehicles, there's a higher chance of having an injury or even a fatality. And while those numbers are declining, it's not declining nearly as fast as they need to, particularly when compared to other road users and other vehicles. And it should also come as no surprise that we have very low vacancy rates. With the expansion of e-commerce, you often have the big players sort of gobbling up as much warehouse space as possible, which is obviously a huge issue for anybody smaller trying to get into the market. And what's the future then? How do we actually find some alternatives to the traditional warehousing? And the sort of final step of the current issues is that because of the high growth in e-commerce and the lack of warehousing, a lot of the consolidation in warehousing actually ends up happening on the street and at the curb. As you can see in this photo, this is not really a surprising or foreign scene, unfortunately. So what are some of the examples of alternatives? So I just want to highlight 4 different types of warehousing. So the first is an urban consolidation center. That's typically at the edge of a city. It's an opportunity for multiple carriers to bring in goods, and then for a single third-party logistics provider to do the last mile. It's usually decent sized. It's maybe not as large as an exurban or suburban warehouse, but it's still quite big. And it serves an entire city or an entire region. Then you get a little bit smaller when it comes to a micro hub. So a micro hub is a mini consolidation center, often located closer to the consumer because that provides more efficiency. And you have to have a network of micro hubs to really make it as efficient as possible. They're much, much smaller spaces. It can be anything from a former store space to a slightly larger, almost empty micro warehouse, if you will. And it tends to serve only a 1 to 5 kilometer radius. And it could really be a single to a multiple carriers working for that last third party logistics. And that also means that because it's smaller, you'll see opportunities for electric vehicles because the distance for transport is not that big. Micro-fulfillment center is a mini distribution center, if you will, and that is also located in an urban core. Think Ferguson just mentioned fulfilling out of a store. So more and more businesses and stores are actually using their own stockroom or even their own floor as a place to actually fulfill items purchased online. So you might be shopping in a store and you look over and there's an employee actually picking from the shelves, just like you are shopping, but they're actually shopping for an online customer. And then we also have dark stores, which is essentially a store. It can often be laid out to look just like a store, but it's only for employees filling orders. So it's a new type of system to actually support some of the e-commerce, but on a hyper-local scale. And then finally, a pickup point. So a pickup point can be anything from a delivery locker to an access point that is a local store that will actually accept your packages for you, to picking up in store. So buy online, pick up in store is becoming more and more popular. We call it's BOPIS or click and collect, and it provides the receiver an opportunity to actually go to the facility and pick it up themselves. So you do it at your convenience. This can be located near your home, near your office, if and when we're back to work, or even at a transit stop. And so those are located and dispersed, and many of you may have actually experienced this. So when it comes to micro-fulfillment, I'm really focusing specifically in this presentation on packages or refrigerated goods like groceries. So this does not really touch on waste or construction logistics, which is obviously a huge issue. But so I'm just going to focus on goods movement. And here is sort of the new innovation happening in micro-fulfillment, and that's the use of automated storage and retrieval systems. So here are 3 examples of companies that are using a shuttle system or robotics to actually move around goods. So you only need 1 or 2 people to actually manage the final picking, the final packing, whereas robots can actually do the picking for you. Now, when it's automated, there is obviously a certain amount of space that you have to have. So AutoStore, for example, on the right, needs to have, I believe, like 8 feet clearance from the top of the system to the ceiling. But all of these can still be done in a very small space. It's obviously expensive and a lot more high tech, but you get a lot out of it. So just a little bit of incentive for folks who really want to make the most. You can use about 1/4 of the space that you normally would do with traditional racking if you install an automated storage and retrieval system. And it should be no surprise that the market is expected to expand greatly when it comes to micro-fulfillment. So this is some innovative solutions that will really help grow. And then when it comes to location, so this is for both micro hubs and micro fulfillment centers, we have very low vacancy rate. We have to be really creative about where we're actually going to store and fulfill goods if we're not going to only have them in the exurbs. Because in order to be as efficient as possible, we need to bring the goods as close to the consumer as possible. And that's what businesses are looking for. So you'll have retrofitted storefronts, such as the image on the left, that's from Bond, to temporary or mobile locations like Local Heroes on the right. There are companies using old parking garages, vacant lots. Amazon is using tents, temporary tents in certain areas, even retrofitting offices. So there are opportunities to find space. When you're only looking for smaller micro locations, it's easier to find. Still a challenge, of course, but you don't have to worry about having the massive size warehousing that you would typically need. And going vertical is a possibility. So what's wonderful about micro hubs and micro fulfillment is that it can actually be used to help solve other problems. So when you have a network of smaller facilities, that means you can use smaller and greener vehicles. So this really enables us to increase the use of cargo cycles and electric vehicles that might not have the range necessary when you're looking at distributing from a single urban consolidation center. But when we use those types of vehicles, that means we also need to design streets better. We need to have better parking for last mile delivery vehicles. We need space that is dedicated to freight, zones dedicated to freight. We need freight loading and unloading spaces. There's nothing worse than having a double parked truck. hanging out on the curb. It's not safe. It creates more emissions. And there are just so many other alternatives here. So design some bike lanes, get some other urban transportation improvements done. And when you're looking to improve bike lanes and get better access to the curb, using freight as the reason can be a really wonderful opportunity for planners and elected officials. And then finally, just in this high-level overview, one of the other benefits from having a decentralized network of fulfillment is the opportunity for zero-emission zones. So that's my one example today on how to create sustainable deliveries, in addition to obviously using the smaller, cleaner vehicles and having these shorter runs. Zero-emission zones are coming. So there are 35 signatory cities to the Green and Healthy Streets Declaration that have stated that they will implement a major zero-emission zone by 2030. The Netherlands goal is 30 to 40 cities there by 2025. And there was a document published last year at the end of 2020 by the Transport Decarbonization Alliance, Polis, and C40 cities on how do we make sure that zero emission zones are designed for freight in mind. And that's easier to do when you have these smaller logistics hubs and fulfillment spaces. And from that paper was born the SURF project, which I'm working on right now. So just wanted to give a plug to that program. So it stands for Sustainable Urban Freight. It is managed by Polis and supported by the Environmental Defense Fund Europe. So this is a program that is two parts. The first is an online course where we teach folks why is freight important, what are zero emission zones, and how can cities actually prepare for zero emission zones, not only designing it, but implementing it and then enforcing it, and how do we evaluate success. And then the other half, we are focusing on 3 instant projects. So we receive funding from the Environmental Defense Fund Europe to actually provide support for 3 cities to prepare for a zero emission zone. So we are working with Ravenna, Italy. They're doing a stakeholder engagement plan. Karditsa, Greece is actually working on a shared cargo bike system so that each business doesn't have to spend a lot of money on a single bicycle. They can all share and have a platform that's supported by the city. And then Aarhus, Denmark is working on ensuring that logistics is included in zero emission zone planning and site-specific plans as well. So again, that's just a very high level overview. There are examples of micro hubs and micro fulfillment centers all over Europe, and I can talk about that in a little bit, but just wanted to give everybody a quick taste on the importance of micro hubs and micro fulfillment centers, why they are enormously beneficial. You can get goods closer to the consumer, which means with these days of on-demand delivery, everybody wants next day, or in urban areas, same day delivery. And if we want to do that and make improve our quality of life and make sure we have reduced emissions and a reduction in traffic with larger, more dangerous vehicles, if we want that reduced, then we really need to look at scaling down our warehousing and fulfillment centers and providing opportunities for alternative last mile delivery. So with that, I am going to
Thank you very much. There are a few questions specifically on the curbside and the pictures that you showed there. And one of the things was exactly what do you think can be done? And you showed a few examples of things that can be done, but is it easy to do it? And what do people actually need I guess that you need your council to allow you to put these things on the street?
Yeah, so when it comes to the government side, a lot of it has to do with policies. Right? So again, mandating a zero emission zone is one thing, but actually providing incentives or tax breaks, that is a really wonderful way for the government to actually support. So you have a carrot and a stick, right? If you demand that all vehicles have to be green, but also supporting those businesses, it's a lot easier for the really, really large players to go green. Great, we can just buy up a ton of electric vehicles or cargo bikes. But what about the smaller fleet operators, somebody who has fewer than 10 trucks? They really need some sort of benefits and incentives. At the curb, we need more loading and unloading zones. We just heard, it's wonderful that we have outdoor dining. We've taken over parking, and I'm an urban planner. I'm a transportation planner. I would love to get rid of all free on-street parking. There is no need for it. That is public space, and that's something that in the industry we're trying to do. There's no need for a person to have, it's free real estate, right? Mm-hmm. Our streets are the largest public space that we have. And so I personally think that freight is a public use, right? That is all of our stuff on the back of those trucks. Those are not personal vehicles. So we need to make space for that and get rid of the free parking and really minimize the number of passenger parking spaces.
And I am just about to bring also into the conversation Paul Nidler from Arcadis. And I think that Marcus is still with us also in a second. Let me just... Morning, Paul, and thank you for...
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Sandra mentioned, and Marcus as well mentioned, something that is happening quite a lot all around the world, which is pedestrianizing zones and taking parking spaces, which in a way it is good. But when we're talking about vacancies in warehouses, what does all of this pedestrianization mean for the last mile warehouse? And I'm also bringing Marcus in the conversation. So the first question I want to ask is to Paul, when we are closing all the city center and we're supposed to ship things closer to customers from the city center, what does it mean for the warehouse?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting point, and Sandra touched on it in terms of the potential solutions around actually how we continue to ensure that goods can get to the end consumer. And for me, it's really about that consolidation. It's about facilitating the last mile to be undertaken not by your traditional LCV, vans, particularly in pedestrianised areas, but in urban city centres. And I think it's crucial that actually we remember that this is predominantly talking about highly dense urban city centres, that government and public and private industries together provide a mechanism to support that consolidation through micro-mobility hubs, through last mile depots, and through smaller local warehouses, such as the sort that Sandra described, to make sure that actually that final delivery can be done on an electric bike, on a cargo bike, by foot. There's been some interesting work done recently by some of the couriers around actually looking at how much of the last yard of the last mile actually can be done on foot. So they may still have a van, but they park it up and actually they walk to 10, 15 deliveries from there, rather than driving door to door around each of the locations.
And one of the other things is speaking specifically about vacancies, because you have a bit more experience in this area. If you're looking into big cities in the UK, how are the vacancies?
Vacancy rates are incredibly low, I think, across the board at the moment. I think recent research by JLL actually showed that the vacancy levels are lower than we've ever seen. A real focus on new warehousing facilities, a lot of focus on speculative development. But I think, notwithstanding all of that, it's really important to remember that actually we've already got over 75% of the building stock that will be in use in 2050. 75% of that already exists. So it's not just about building new warehouses, building new facilities. It's really about understanding how we can be doing more and more repurposing. I loved some of the examples, Sandra, in your presentation around actually what can be done. Do you take a car park? Do you take, the top floor of a retail store that was a department store? Perhaps in its new guise, the ground floor becomes experiential retail in a new world, but actually other floors can then be used for urban logistics.
I think it's a really interesting point, but I think that kind of I think this links into the world of collaboration, doesn't it? In terms of, you know, your large. Let's look at a large multi-billion operator with a national presence. They're still going to be out in a big motorway corridor with a couple of million square feet, producing parcels at a rate of knots. And I think some of the key to collaboration, repurposing of urban spaces is reliant on people getting together to solve each other's problems in the least disruptive way. And whether that be smoothing the profile for the retailer, to your point, Paul, I think I absolutely applaud the things you're saying, and I was super interested in the stuff that Sandra is saying as well. But just looking at the profile, having done a lot around commercial property recently in London, and just understanding how competitive the market is when you're looking in sheds of a certain space, be it lower than 30,000 square feet, and just how few of them exist in urban centres versus the 200 to million square feet that I can go to junction 13 of the M1 and go shopping all day. And I think it's that rebalance that's really interesting, because actually the demands of consumers and the demands of retailers are, let's get more collaboration, let's get faster, to Sandra's point, and all of those challenges. Let's get cheaper, let's get faster, let's get greener, let's be less impactful, let's be more lined up. And I think in order to do that, there's a big journey of collaboration, information sharing, repurposing for a lot of previously competitive relationships, I think, Paul. And I think it's going to be quite an interesting 5 years. Personally, I'm really energized by it, because I think I've got so much hope for us all coming together in logistics to decide how we can better operate for the benefit of all of our impacts and all of our bottom lines. And I think it's people like Sandra that will help to educate us to do that a little bit better, hopefully.
We're working in an increasingly digitalized world, and I wonder to what extent we'll see that facilitating exactly what you're talking about, Marcus. Sandra, you gave some examples of automation in terms of robotics in warehouses, and you know, and we also see that from a grocery point of view in the UK in terms of the Arcadis platform. But I also wonder to what extent digitalization will support collaboration in warehousing space. At the moment, spaces generally are single tenant, single occupancy, and single workflow. Actually, you know, the capability, I think, is there for much more sharing and dynamic use of these spaces to facilitate potentially smaller firms who have a dynamic need or a need at a particular time of day, may not want to take a 15-year fully repairing, maintaining lease on a 20,000 square foot capacity, you know, facility, but actually do need something on a fairly regular basis to support their business. And actually that could be shared using digitalization and some intelligence with other users to maximize the throughput and the efficiency of that piece of land for a developer. And I think we'll see more of those sorts of digital platforms come forward, whether it's from the big kind of existing organizations or some market entrants.
And I think to that point, you also may see the opportunity for joint procurement, right? Especially for smaller businesses, if there are opportunities to purchase basic goods together, then that can actually be stored in the micro fulfillment space or something else, and you get, you know, better pricing. But by collaborating virtually, maybe it's a business improvement district, right? And everybody needs to buy copy paper, right? There's no reason why everybody needs their own copy paper supplier, and we need 5 trucks on the street each delivering copy paper. Let's just work together, order it, get, you know, cheaper price, and we only have one vehicle going to a high street. So I think that's another way to bring in the digital factor.
And I want to bring a question from LinkedIn from Scott Williams. For some reason, his name is not displaying, but which does the panel see growing the most? Centralized, large out of town warehouses, or more smaller on the edge or in the city center?
Smaller in the center.
Well, I think,
I don't think we're not allowed to say both, are we, really?
That's where I was, to be honest. I think it's a healthy measure of both as retailers, and particularly grab for more efficiency. I think that drives a requirement for urban centres to provide the specialised delivery offers that consumers expect.
I think if I could answer it in a very slightly different way, which is where will we see the most change? I think that is definitely towards the city centre location. I think the more people become accustomed to the concept of free next day or same day or same day delivery, then that drives a change in behaviour in terms of the way the logistics is moved around. They have to be stored closer to the end consumer. And so that is naturally driving a different approach than we have previously been used to around the kind of the last mile, or that part of the supply chain. It doesn't mean, in my view, that there isn't still huge demand for large out of town warehousing in terms of the hub and spoke model, because they are supporting the increase in volume. And I think that those two different drivers that are creating the demand, the volume is increasing year on year. COVID, we know, has moved the whole industry forward 5 years or so at least. And so the volumes are there. But there's also the change in societal expectations, which is driving I want my T-shirt now, and I expect it to be delivered later on this afternoon, or my groceries, or the pint of milk that I forgot.
And Sandra, you were very quick to say city centers. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, I think there's been such a push to green our last mile, and it's certainly easier to do that when you have a network of smaller spaces scattered in an urban area. We want to get the goods as close to the consumer as possible. And so I think that, there's a big push in that direction to really green our vehicles. And everybody wants next day or same day delivery. One of our biggest problems is that button, right? That little button when you're ordering something that says, next day or same day, and you have, things like Amazon Prime, you only have to spend however much money a year, and then look at this free shipping. It's the high cost of free shipping. It's actually a really, really big problem. And unfortunately, I don't see consumer behavior changing, although I would love to. But also on the digitization, there are many businesses out there that do now have a button that says, you know what, I don't need this shirt in the next hour. If somebody else in my neighborhood or my zip code is also ordering from you, and we could bundle our deliveries, then you know what, I can wait. 35 hours. So I can press, a button that says, choose a green option or bundle with my neighbors. And so that's another way to do that. And that's easier to do in an urban core.
And we talked a lot about, when we talk about last mile, it's usually about urban and city. But there is a question from Robertson, who says that how can we see all of these things transferred into rural settings? Do you think that it is even possible?
I think it is possible, and I'm really interested. I now feel like I've gone off a bit too quickly, so I'm waiting to see what Sandra says about this, because I think Sandra's a better expert than I am. My view would be, with the ultra development that needs to take place in urban centres to create better density, better efficiency, more sympathetic vehicle types, more considered routes of delivery. I think naturally those benefits and those advances will move into more rural settings anyway, and hauliers and carriers will want to deploy those. I think also what is true is a technology on the retailer's end, talking from my past in the retailer's end, it is increasingly being able to gear a proposition towards the market that you're focused on. And having done lots of work in New York, as I know Sandra has, and lots of work in central London, there's nothing like a Chelsea customer for wanting it right now. And I apologise to anybody on the call from Chelsea or Manhattan, versus a customer in the rural areas of Norfolk that perhaps have a slightly different profile of e-commerce. And I think what's important is being able to offer choice. And I think for a long time, retailers and key verticals have competed on speed, and speed has been used as a marketing tool to demonstrate and to drive consumer interest rather than actually a requirement from the consumer. And I think it started with grocery with our delivery slots, and it spread almost endemic to the point that everything is how fast, how cheap. I remember launching Click and Collect with John Lewis many years ago, and I worked for John Lewis, and Click and Collect was slightly less inconvenient than being out when your delivery came. But we saw the growth of click and collect drove customers to just order it on click and collect for the next day, even if they knew they weren't going to be in the city centre then. So I think we've got a responsibility to give choice, and that's slightly more complicated in our tech stacks, but it drives us then towards better aggregation and better opportunities to monitor and collate what we're doing in rural areas and in urban areas. But it requires a commitment both from the retailers and the e-commerce agents to launch those propositions and offer the choices, but also for the consumers, and I'm guilty as well, to read the proposition and choose the one that's most appropriate to me rather than the one that makes me feel safe, which, hold my hands up, is always what, an hour now, today, right now, because I feel like I've spent my money. So I think it's an education, and I think it's going to take some time, but it will come to rural settings. It'll have to.
And it's difficult to drive those behaviours when every option is free.
Exactly that.
And one of the things I think, in a way, about behavior is the question with how to control final mile costs with such a surge in e-commerce buying behavior, particularly when spiraling driver constraints, and which is one thing that the UK currently is struggling quite a lot. But the US, I know, is also not in the best of positions with drivers. So how do you think we can finally, before we finish, control the costs?
This could be a career limiting statement, but I think actually you need to price delivery services appropriately. I'm going to come back to a point that I've made. Final mile delivery and logistics services in urban areas and rural areas have experienced over the last 10 to 15 years a race to the bottom, or basically been used as competitive advantage for speed and price, to both Paul's and Sandra's point. The reality is that if any of us today get in our cars or get on public transport and travel to be somewhere at a precise time, we expect it to cost us an amount of money that's relevant to the journey, unless you're on national rail, and then you might feel it's less relevant to the journey. But that's the debate. You know, there's a fee that's associated with those things. I think there's a period of time that we've experienced free delivery, and what we now need to do is reintroduce the reality of the costs for professional, technologically based services and their impact on the environment, and for that to be reflected in whole ecosystem costs. So retailers pricing responsibly and consumers responding to that with selecting the services most appropriate for their needs. And I hope I haven't offended anybody, but I think that's how we'll get better.
I completely agree with you, Marcus. I think something that we might see sort of pushing that a little bit is congestion pricing. Right? So London already has emission zones. We're going to have more zero emission zones. And how do we get the cost passed on to the customer? I don't know if anybody really has the right answer, the right solution, but how do we say, you know what, that's great that you have this, you've purchased this special membership, so you have free shipping, but yeah, it's hard to undo that behavior and undo the mentality of, well, look how convenient this is. This is wonderful, without hurting some of those businesses as well. So how do we pass the price? I know there's a city council person in New York who has actually proposed, how do we put a fee on every single package? Wouldn't that be great? Everyone says, yes. How are we going to do that? How is that even possible? And Marcus, as you said, it's a race to the bottom. So how do we know that even the big players, right? So, you know, UPS will say Amazon is our biggest customer, right? They do that drop ship, they do all the last mile. They will also say that Amazon is our biggest competitor. So, you know, if everyone's racing for the bottom, they're going to say, hey, Amazon, I'm going to pay you as little as possible to take on your packages. But then how does that cost get, you know, they're eating that, right? And so how are they going to actually put that on the consumer?
And I think we're seeing it. So, sorry, Nick, just to jump in, but I think with COP26 and everything that we've got coming down the line, I think it is a whole ecosystem move. I think we need a charter around these things, which is some best practice and some guides that keep people away from this unhealthy competitiveness of just removing barriers and competing on price or on mediocre service. But I don't know how we do that. I'm hoping that I come up with the idea, because I think it'd be a very successful business when I do.
And finally, the
World Economic Forum report that came out last year, I think it was, in terms of consolidating the last mile, and actually, you know, the clear recommendations that it has to be, as you said, Mark, as an ecosystem approach. There's not going to be one solution, and it's not just about cost. It's about congestion. It's about emissions. It's about, you know, all of them, and actually how the final mile plays such a crucial part in that, and how by working together, I think we can be more efficient whilst recognising that you're probably not going to change consumer expectations in a very short period of time.
100% agree.
I want to thank all of you and for everyone who was watching. Before we finish with today, this is not the final last mile webinar. We have 3 more. Next week on Tuesday, we're going to talk specifically about costs and order fulfillment with PC Henderson Consulting, Zedify UK, who are doing quite a lot of order fulfillment in around cities in the UK. Irby, doing a lot of fulfillment in New York. Gopher, another last mile company, and also Anand Asi, who was one of the people who asked a question. I will send today's recording to people who are watching. If you haven't already signed up for our emailing list, you can go to our website, thelogisticspoint.com, where you can receive more information and more contacts of our speakers. Thank you very much, Sandra, Paul, and Marcus, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Cheers, guys. Take care.